So the main cooling systems, though, for cattle haven't changed much over the years. Most of them involve some sort of shade structure, and most of them involve some sort of water. Now, back in my grandfather's generation, that involved tall oak trees, and it involved either a pond or some sort of creek that the cows could stand in. And while the technology has changed quite a bit, the idea behind it has not changed. And so any opportunity that we have to provide any sort of shade or water-involved cooling for those cows is advantageous. Now, depending on the environment in which those cows are being housed in, both the geographical location and the type of housing, we may want to employ either the use of full-on sprinklers or misting systems. In addition, we would like to have fans that are on those cows, of course, at all times. And if we have the opportunity and the capital to invest, we can invest in the corral cool systems, which is one of the most effective systems that I've personally had experience with. But no matter what type of cooling system we choose to employ for those cows, it's very important that the run times of those systems need to be optimized. Most of those systems require quite a bit of electrical, and then they also require quite a bit of water. And so the cost to run those systems can be quite extensive. We also know, though, that even short-term cooling of cattle around the time of insemination is going to improve fertility. So if we don't have the ability to cool those cattle long-term, even short-term would be okay. And this set of data that I have down at the bottom of the slide is one of the shortest durations of cooling that I found that had an impact on reproduction. This was a study that was conducted with Holstein heifers, and the Holstein heifers were only cooled for 2 hours prior to insemination and 2 hours following insemination. And the cooling mechanisms were either the shade plus the sprinkler, or the shade plus the sprinkler plus the fan. And you can see then that the control animals were only given shade as the cooling mechanism. So I imagine, though, that if you went out onto a farm where they had a pregnancy rate in their dairy heifers of 23%, and they were only giving them shade for a cooling mechanism, and you told them that you could increase their pregnancy rate to 56% by giving them 4 hours worth of cooling under a sprinkler and a fan, I imagine most producers would try to figure out a way to make that happen. That sounds pretty reasonable to most people. So even the short-term cooling in both lactating cows and in heifers is effective for improving fertility. Now, unfortunately, we have to remember that the cow has a mind of her own. And so research has shown that cattle have individual preferences for the type of cooling that they would voluntarily go to. So in recent research, it was shown that whenever cows were given voluntary access to sprinklers, there was a high degree of individual variation. Some of the cows spent 0 hours under the sprinklers. Some of the cows spent 8 hours under the sprinklers. And I'm sure you can imagine either one of those extremes is detrimental to production and fertility. Also, in another study where the cows were given a choice between sprinklers and shade, most of the cows chose shade over the sprinklers, even though the sprinklers gave them more relief from the heat stress conditions. So as we're designing these systems and as we're looking at the locations of where we're going to put these sprinklers or these fans, we need to take into account whether or not we want that to be voluntary by the cattle, or if we want that to be a mandatory situation where the cows have to pass under sprinklers, either in an alleyway, in the holding pen, or perhaps by the feed bunk.